We're Amy and Christina, two moms who learned the hard way that there's a lot we wish we knew about pregnancy and parenting.
So now we're asking experts all the questions, sharing what we've learned and what we're still figuring out, and keeping it real along the way. Welcome to What I Wish I Knew.
Anyone with kids knows that toddlerhood has, let's just say, a reputation. The terrible twos, the terrible threes, the fearsome fours. It's a time, that's for sure.
Raising a toddler is like being a full-time bodyguard for a tiny, drunk daredevil. 0% coordination and 100% confidence. So it's understandable to approach that period with more than a little trepidation.
In this episode, we had the pleasure of speaking with Devon Kuntzman, the original toddler parenting expert, founder of Transforming Toddlerhood, and author of a book by the same name. She makes a pretty compelling case for reframing toddlerhood by understanding what's happening in those teeny tiny brains, setting appropriate expectations for their behavior, and learning how to navigate the incredible development that's happening during this period.
Toddlers will be toddlers. It's true. The point is that the chaos is normal, even necessary for their growth. And it doesn't have to be a nightmare, not even close. So let's get into it.
Devon, welcome to What I Wish I Knew.
Thank you.
We're so
So
excited to
excited.
talk to you.
Everyone
We're all
is excited.
We keep interrupting each other. Yes. We're so excited to talk about toddlers because Christina and I both have like the older edge of toddlerhood now for our first, but our youngest girls are, going to be 1 in a couple of months. So soon we'll be entering the wild world of toddlerhood. So to start things off, toddlerhood is obviously just, you said in your book, which is coming out in October, that you felt like toddlerhood has like a terrible PR agent because it's all these like terrible twos, like tiny tyrants, like all of these phrases that make toddlerhood seem so terrible. And so your whole like POV is that you're sort of transforming the way that people think about toddlerhood from this horrible experience that toddlers are so terrible to it being like an opportunity for connection and just like a time that's actually really special and cool. So how did you come to this? You've been around for a long time.
Yes, it's such an important developmental period and so challenging at the same time. And I think for many years, I was a nanny for high profile families all over the world and spent a lot of time with a lot of different toddlers, helping toddlers adjust to a new sibling. And I mean, I already also studied child development and psychology in school. And I have just over the years saw firsthand, and now as a mom myself, how challenging toddlerhood is, but have also realized that if we go into this developmental period white knuckling it, expecting the worst, then we actually end up missing the whole point. And the whole point is that our little one is trying to become their own self or discover their individuality for the very first time. And that's a really, really big job. And so I realize that all of the things that we think about toddlerhood, the things that frustrate us and make us so upset, are coming from the lens of like our adult, logical, mature brain. When our toddlers, their brains are very immature and they spend a lot of time in their emotional brain. And that is really the point, is that toddlerhood, all of these behaviors are not our children trying to like be bad, be rude, be manipulative. They are trying to communicate. And if we say that they're terrible, then we're going to miss the opportunity for setting the foundation for the rest of their life, because we know that the bulk of the brain development and the neural pathways and connections being formed happens in the first 5 years of life. So it's so important for us to remember that yes, it is challenging, but it's also a critical developmental period. And then when we start looking at it through this lens, we start to realize that all of these moments where our kids are driving us crazy, they're doing the best that they can with what they have, and that they need to learn more skills and need more brain maturation to be able to meet our expectations. And quite frankly, our expectations are usually very wildly inappropriate for what our toddlers can actually do.
Oh, that's so true. One part that I actually really loved in the book was you had a list of all the things that toddlers can't do. And I was reading
Mm.
this list like, oh my God. Yeah, no, that's true. Because you look at their behavior, we all do. We evaluate their behavior through what we think is right and good and proper. And it's hard to remember. Like some of the things in the list, I think it was like they can't like understand time. They don't
Mhm.
understand like 5 more minutes. They don't understand what that means. So of course they're going to be pissed when you're like, okay, the 5 minutes is up. Like they have a trouble controlling their emotions. Like they don't know how, they're still building like their empathy muscles, like figuring out how to actually be empathetic to others. Like that was actually really helpful because you're right. I think we expect toddlers to act a certain way, whether it's terrible or too good. Like it goes both ways. And if you just let them live, be like, they're just trying to live right now, it really does help kind of shift the mindset a little bit.
Mhm.
I mean, they're still hard. They're really hard. They're so hard.
It's so challenging, right? And like, but just knowing that your toddler is not trying to do something to you on purpose and knowing that they're doing the best they can in this moment maybe allows us to start approaching it in a slightly different way. And, really move away from the idea that we need to punish them. Because what we're doing is punishing them for having a lack of skills, right? Like,
Mm,
if we thought about in like another scenario, like, would you punish your kid for like not being able to swim or ride a bike? No.
right.
So like, but those are like physical skills that we can see, but the emotional skills and the impulse control skills are like skills that are more hidden. And so we oftentimes end up punishing our kids for a lack of skills.
That's so interesting because also you talk in your book about the difference in discipline of like using punishment versus an opportunity to teach, which goes along with what you're saying, which is they don't know how to do so much of this stuff. So when they do it wrong, in our eyes, wrong, and what we do is punish them or, put them in timeout or shame them, even if we don't mean to shame them, or instead of teaching them and helping them learn how to do it better the next time, you're right. I mean, how can we just expect them to magically change and know what to do without us using these tools to like help them learn?
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of the parenting tactics and discipline tools that we've used conventionally really are working against our child's development, not with it, right? So, like when we're sending a child to timeout per se, because they are, didn't listen to us, right? Like you told them not to grab the remote control from like the shelf and they took it anyways, and then we send them timeout for not listening. What we're doing is we're not getting to the root of the behavior of like, why is this behavior happening in the first place? And you have to get to the root of the behavior to be able to transform it. And B, when a child is really upset or dysregulated, they need help coming from their lower brain, their downstairs brain, to their upper brain or upstairs brain. And this was a term coined by Dan Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson, who Tina wrote the foreword to my book. And, when we cut them off from their safe and secure base by putting them in timeout, I mean, I think we've all seen it. You put your kid in timeout and then they go ballistic, right? Because now we're cutting them off from the support they need to regulate their emotions. So, really, oftentimes, punishment, we need to ask ourselves, instead of what punishment does my child need to learn a lesson, what we need to do is say, what skill does my child need to learn to succeed here? What is it that they're struggling with? How do we get to the root of it? And how do we teach them a better skill, whether it's impulse control or coping with their big emotions, or like handling disappointment or frustration or things like that? How do we help them learn those skills?
Devon, you mentioned the downstairs brain and the upstairs brain. Can you tell everybody what the difference is between those
Yes.
two?
Yes, absolutely. So the downstairs brain is like the more primitive or primal brain that is responsible for lots of different things, including like, things that we don't have to think about, like breathing, swallowing, blinking our eyes, but also where the emotional center is for the brain. So it's where the stress response lives. So that fight, flight, freeze response, fear, all of that is happening in the downstairs brain. And so toddlers can very easily drop into this area of the brain because it's the part of the brain that's the most mature inside of a toddler. Whereas there's also the upstairs brain, which is more sophisticated, made up of many parts, including the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for planning, logical thinking, emotional regulation, impulse control, empathy, all of this. Now, toddlers can access this place, but they don't spend a ton of time there because it is not fully mature and it's still developing. That's why it's so easy for toddlers to drop down into that lower brain and just fall into like a tantrum, having a tantrum, or getting very frustrated. And you couple that with their lack of skills and life experience. And so you find ourselves with our toddlers down there a lot. And it's our job to kind of walk them back up to the upstairs brain. But can be really hard because our toddlers over here in the emotional brain, we're in the logical brain. So oftentimes we'll like kind of miss each other, what we're communicating, because we're thinking in our heads from our logical brain, that's not a big deal. Why are they doing that? They just need to stop, because we can't remember what it's like to be 2 years old or 3 years old.
I mean, to be fair, 5 years old. I feel like my 5-year-old she has big emotions, right? And so sometimes you'll see when she switches too. Like she gets really angry and then she starts charging at you. And it's taken me a very long time to figure out what I need to say to get her back upstairs. And what I need to say, and I don't know if this is helpful to anybody else, is like, think about what you're doing. Think about what you're about to do, because she's charging me because she wants to hit me. But she knows that I've been like, you can be angry, but you can't hit. And so I'm like, think about it. Think about what you're about to do. Do you have any tips to help walk toddlers from their downstairs brain to their upstairs brain?
Yes. So it really comes back to like those connection-based strategies, right? So like if, for example, when I was talking earlier about timeout, oftentimes if we put a child in timeout, we are separating them from us and their like lifeline. So they're going to go deeper into their emotional brain. Whereas using connection-based things, like sometimes it might be giving a hug or some words of reassurance. It might be, instead of like saying something like, I told you not to run. Now, look, that's why you fell down and scraped your knees. You might say something like, you fell down and scraped your knees. That hurts, doesn't it? And give like a hug. That's how we walk a child from like their lower brain back to their upper brain. But you gave such a great example too about like, think about it, think about what you're doing. It's all of these connection-based things. Or say your daughter is like starting to raise her hand, but then puts her hand down. A great thing you can do is say, wow, you were so mad you wanted to hit and you decided not to. And then, you could say something like, oh, that shows so much self-control, where now your child is noticing their, self-control, their progress, the behavior that you want to see. And that's going to help them have more of it.
Yeah, it's been a process with her. And a lot of it stems from also like me, the parent, like regulating myself. Mm-hmm. And that's why I loved reading in your book about like all of the different parent roles that there are. Yes. Like I might get these wrong, but there was like the permissive pushover, the controlling commander, the negotiator,
nagging negotiator.
But then what you want to be is this confident leader. And honestly, like, I hate to say this, Devon, I think I've been all of those bad ones, or not bad, but like not
we
ideal.
All have. We all
have. Probably
at
the same time.
Too. I have too. So what I like to call them are like the disempowered parenting roles, right? And here's the truth of it. We're all going to spend some time there, right? Because we're human beings. And so we all have our own feelings, emotions, and needs. And there's going to be times that our needs are not taken care of, where our emotions are out of control, where we're just generally under-resourced for the day, whether we're under-resourced because we haven't eaten or we haven't had a break or we haven't had enough sleep, whatever it is. So we're all going to spend time in these different roles. And once we can identify the roles and start looking at the patterns that we have, we can start identifying when we might slip into the permissive pushover, which is at one end of the spectrum, where your child is in control, right? Where you might be walking on eggshells or giving in to appease your child all the time. But then on the other end of that spectrum is the controlling commander. And this is where it's like this idea of where the parent's in control, the my way or the highway mentality, where the child's feelings, emotions, and needs are not considered at all. And then somewhere in the middle is the nagging negotiator, where everyone's in vying for control and there's a lot of power struggles. And so we're all going to spend time there sometimes. And once we notice the patterns, we can start making an effort to spend more time in the role of the confident leader and guide. And that's where we're in charge. That's where we're taking our children's feelings, emotions, and needs into consideration, but within our boundaries, within a container that we have created. So our boundaries aren't constantly being crossed, because when you're the permissive pushover, your boundaries are constantly crossed. And then all of a sudden the pendulum swings to the other side. And now you're in the role of the controlling commander. Now, I just want to say this doesn't make you bad, wrong, or a horrible parent, or that you're failing. What it means is that you need more support. And that's really what my account, my book is here for, is to like give that support, that pep talk, because we just have to realize that we're human beings and it's okay to be human.
Yep. I was thinking about this a little bit about my own triggers, or when I was actually like evaluating when I feel like I'm the most like sort of militant in my like just do what I say, because I think that's where I'm not very permissive most of the time. More I swing into like just do what I'm asking you to do. It's not a big deal. And I was thinking throughout the day of when I do that the most often, and it's almost always at the same time, which is getting ready for bed, because my 4.5-year-old sometimes, just for whatever reason, doesn't want to put on his pajamas. Like he just doesn't want to do it. There's no reason. Nothing is different. Like sometimes it'll be perfect and he has no problem and we're chit-chatting and bedtime is great. And sometimes it's like pulling teeth to get him to just take his shirt off. Just take your shirt off. And so I was like, why is that? Like, it's frustrating, sure, but he does other frustrating things. I think at that point in the day, I am emotionally and physically depleted. I'm worried about him waking up his sister because their rooms are next to each other. So I'm like hyper vigilant about him being too loud or yelling or something like that. It's just like all these things that make sense if you stop and look at it, of why I'm like kind of why him being a pill is sending me faster than it normally would. By then in the day, I'm like, I have no F's left to give. Like, and so that's why it's hard. So it's like, it is helpful to identify when you're doing these things, because it can help you either avoid it, or once you like start sliding into it, you can be like, okay, wait, you're being an asshole because you're tired. He's tired too. He had he lived the same day I did, it is really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I always say awareness is the first step to creating change, because if you're not aware of what's happening when, then how could it ever transform or change? So I'm actually a huge fan of tracking behaviors, whether it's your own, behavior, your toddler's behavior, because this is how we create that awareness, identify patterns, which allows us to create shifts and transformation. And it is so important, because when we notice this, and we're like, oh, wait, we're actually all just tired, or, oh, we're all just hungry. That's when we can say, oh, okay, we're both doing the best we can here. So that's one way that we start to disrupt the stress response, because really in the end, to like shift out of some of these roles, or to really ground ourselves and calm ourselves, we have to be able to disrupt the stress response, that sense of urgency that's happening, that fight, flight, freeze response that's telling us there is a threat and that's making us react automatically.
Mm-hmm.
When we are able to start to disrupt that, then that's when we create some space. We're able to pause, and we're able to shift the way that we're responding into a more intentional response. And I talk about this a lot actually in the book.
This is not an emergency, right? You were like, say that to yourself. This is not an emergency.
You read it. You read it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I read it.
Yep.
I read it multiple times. This is not an emergency. Like, just because he doesn't take his shirt off when I want him to, this is not an emergency.
Right. But
even
the problem is our brain is telling us it's an emergency. So we've dropped down into our downstairs brain. So we have to like almost fight against that innate biology, right? And because it's our brain is telling ourselves there's a perceived threat here, that there's an emergency. So we have to like disrupt it and be like, wait, no, this is not an emergency. My toddler is not, like no one's going to the hospital right now. That's what I consider emergency. By the way, it's like anyone who's about to be hurt or we're going to need to go to the hospital, like that's an emergency.
Yep.
That's a big, like, moving energy around is a big thing when it comes to that, because you're stuck, right? You're stuck in like you've said, Devon, like fight or flight, right? I think that this is a big deal. And if you move your energy, if you shake yourself around, like you kind of move all that out, which is good. I think that that's also an indicator then for Miller too, that like, oh, mommy's being silly. Like, maybe I'll take off my shirt and join her and throw it around my head like a helicopter, right? What was that song when we were in middle school?
Petey Pablo.
Petey Pablo.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And I'm a huge fan of using the 5 senses to really disrupt that stress response. And for some people, it might look like lighting a candle, a scented candle, or smelling some essential oils. For others, it might look like walking to the window, like looking outside, seeing what you can see, or throwing it open, taking a breath of fresh air, laying down, jumping around, blowing bubbles. Like you blow some bubbles, you're feeling better. You're distracting like your mind enough to, I'm not saying you want to distract your mind away from your emotions, but you're like doing like something that just shifts to disrupt the stress response. And then, I mean, kids love bubbles too. All of a sudden now they're in a completely different place because they're chasing bubbles, right? Like there's so many things that you can do.
Yeah.
Is there anything that takes like, is there any distraction or is there any takeaway that like doing something to distract from an emotion is actually not a good idea, or is it a good idea at this age, right? Because sometimes it's like, do you want them to feel the emotion and like teach them how to move through it? Or is it like, no, do bubbles so that we all get through bedtime alive?
Yeah, this is a great question. And there's a difference between distracting from an emotion and helping a child move on and move through an emotion. And I talk about this in one of the FAQs at the end of one of the chapters in the book. There's a difference between like distracting them to prevent feeling the emotions and having a tantrum versus helping your child move on when they're in the throes of a tantrum, but they are seemingly a little bit stuck in that stress response and need help moving forward. And sometimes moving forward might just look like you actually moving forward, right? So like if your child's like on the floor of the hallway before bed, like having a huge meltdown, like just walking into their room and like getting some books off the shelf and starting to read one might be enough of a signal to help them move through. Or it might be blowing bubbles or turning on music. Or if this is like a middle of the day, stepping outside, fresh air helps everyone get back on track. Nature is so helpful. So that's the difference between like when like quote unquote distractions, like how to use them in a developmentally appropriate way.
Right. That's really interesting because I think the other thing, when they're in that really hyped up, like sort of, I don't know, that circle of, I've already like sort of sent off my mom and I can tell that. And like now we're just keep going. I also do try to name the feelings for him of like, you're feeling really upset because of this. It makes you mad when this happens. And I think for a while it didn't do anything except frankly like tick him off. He was being like, why are you saying this to me? Like, stop telling me how I feel. But now that he's a little bit older, he says them back to me sometimes. Like he'll say, it doesn't happen every time, of course, but he'll say, I'm feeling really frustrated that I have to get out of the car. And like it doesn't make it easier to get him out of the car, but he's recognizing that he feels that way. He's telling me that he feels that way. Like I feel like that's progress, even though again, doesn't always make it easier to get him out of the car when he has to get out of the car.
Well, it's huge progress. And this is the joy and beauty of having an older toddler, which in the introduction, I delineate between younger toddlers and older toddlers. Older toddlers have a better command of expressive language. And so when they're able to say something back, because you've been practicing it with them before they had those expressive language skills, but they had receptive language, so they understood what you were saying, then you have a toddler who's saying, I'm really frustrated. I don't want to get out of the car. And that's when you can say, I hear you. You're feeling really frustrated right now. which is great because you can validate them. So you're creating connection. And then you may or may not need to reset the limit, which is, you might say something like, and it's time for us to get out. And as you're turning off the engine, you're like getting out of the car, all the things. But then you might also then walk around, open up his door and say, how can we make this easier? Or what can we do to make this better? So now you're in problem solving mode, which is one way you can teach skills. And so problem solving, when you have a 3, 4, 5-year-old, now they're able to join you in figuring out what to do next. And the precursor to that is your child saying, I'm feeling frustrated, right? Because you're now working together as a team, which is so great because you start to realize I don't have to have it all figured out all the time. Yes, you're still the leader. Yes, you're still in charge. And you can partner with your child to figure out how to move forward, because the whole point of parenting is to work yourself out of the job, to transfer the skills over to them. So you actually don't need to have all the answers all the time. You can work with your kid to figure it out.
I love that, because the other thing that I love, sorry, Christina, I've been talking so much in this conversation, but the other thing that I loved was when you were talking about sort of leading with curiosity of when you're in a situation, one of the things you can do is just kind of pause, first of all, just don't do anything, just pause. And then to ask them how they're feeling, trying to understand more where they're coming from, because I think number one, it pulls you out of the moment. Number two, you get to learn more about your kid. Number three, your kid feels like you're interested in them and their feelings matter and what they're thinking matters. And I just think it's kind of cool, especially as they're older, that sometimes they do say things that make total sense of why they're doing something. And you're like, oh, I didn't realize that had happened last time we did it. And so you were scared it was going to happen again. But I don't know, that curiosity approach, I just really love too.
Yes. Especially when you have an older toddler, asking what's your plan is huge, because you might actually realize it looks on the surface, it looks like your kid's doing something just to make you mad or annoy you, when actually they're trying to execute something or figure something out. And they actually are executing a whole plan that they have in their head. So that type of curiosity can be so, so helpful. And curiosity is part of creating connection. I say in my book, I talk in depth about the recipe for effective discipline, which is creating connection, setting and following through on limits, and teaching skills. And you need all three of the ingredients of the recipe to have effective, healthy, developmentally smart discipline. And so being curious is part of creating connection. You can create physical connection by sitting close by, getting down on your child's level, putting a hand on their shoulder maybe, and then also that emotional connection by just observing and describing what's going on, getting curious, validating their feelings and emotions and their experience. All of these things are part of creating that connection. And then what's so magical is when you get more used to creating connection and kind of sitting there with it, you start to realize, oh, connection can actually help overcome a lot of challenges. And you might not even have a chance to move on to the rest of the recipe, because the connection was enough of a soothing balm to just dissipate whatever was happening. But if we only use connection and don't move on whenever connection isn't enough, and we don't move on to setting limits and following through and teaching skills, then that's where we get into permissive parenting, when it's only connection based, but we forget the other elements of the recipe.
Devon, I wanted to get your thoughts on F around and find out parenting, because this is we had a big thing about gentle parenting, which I think gets a bad rap weirdly. I think gentle parenting is not what people think it is. And now the internet has moved on to the F around and find out parenting, or natural consequences, probably as normal people would call it. But I like F around and find out. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Yes. Oh my gosh. So first of all, I just want to say, when it comes to gentle parenting, it's so important just to understand that when we say gentle parenting, it means you're gentle with emotions, right? You're taking into consideration your child's feelings, emotions, and needs. But it does not mean gentle with your with limits, setting limits. We're still setting clear, firm limits. And I think that's the biggest challenge there. And so so then parents, I think, are kind of like fed up in a way, and they're like, okay, well, what about like fuck around, find out parenting? But the challenge is that while natural consequences are a very important part of parenting, because toddlers and all children learn great through experience, oftentimes it's done in a way where it's like kind of like I told you so. Now you're gonna have to find out the hard way, right?
Yeah.
Where it's not necessarily considering your child's developmental stage. And I think that's the biggest thing, is that it's not appropriate for every situation. You have to look at risk. Like, keeping our kids safe is our responsibility. So you never want to use this type of parenting or natural consequences when safety is on the line. And, ultimately, we want to really have freedom within boundaries and limits. So while I think it's important to have natural consequences, it's super, super important. But if we're just letting kids find things out without giving them guidance and support, then that is counterproductive in supporting them in their emotional health and resilience. And so it's all about like, how do we give our children's freedom within our guidance? How do we help them learn from experience and reduce power struggles, give them bodily autonomy within boundaries and limits that we set?
Totally.
I love it. And also, I've been doing this lately with my daughter because she wants to wear heels everywhere. And I'm like, honey, we're going to walk.
Yeah,
Right.
let me teach you about blisters, sweet angel. You don't want them.
No.
Yes. So like, you let her start out in the heels, but you also bring her sneakers. And when she figures it out, now you're there, because that's what warm, supportive parenting is all about. And that's how you support her in learning and becoming her own person, reducing power struggles, but also, you're taking care of her physically and emotionally.
Yes, she needs to learn that stilettos are not comfortable. You want to go for a thicker heel.
Wedges are out right now, but I could help you find some cute ones if you're interested.
Sneaker wedges, remember those? Anyway.
Snedges? Wedgekers?
Devon, I was wondering what you wish you had known about toddlerhood before you went into the foray of, nannying and having your own toddlers. If you were to talk to a new parent right now, what would you tell them that you would wish you'd known?
Yeah. Gosh. First, I mean, I think the biggest thing is that all behavior is communication. Your toddler's not being bad, rude, manipulative, or trying to like ruin your day on purpose or something. That all behavior is communication. So they're not giving you a hard time, they're having a hard time. And when we understand this, it can completely shift. When we shift the lens through which we're looking at the behavior, it can really greatly shift our response, because it gets us out of that stress response and into a more compassionate place where we can execute the recipe for effective discipline. And I think that, and then just understanding what typical behaviors look like for kids ages 1 to 5. Because if you do not have realistic expectations, then parenting is going to be a lot harder, and you're going to find yourself frustrated all the time, looking at experiencing all of these different behaviors from your child, when you're thinking, why are they doing that? This is so annoying. I can't stand it. They shouldn't be doing this. Am I messing up? Is there something wrong with my child? I must be failing. When your kid's actually just having developmentally typical behavior. And so the sooner you understand that, then you can start to say, okay, this is typical behavior. And then you can learn how to decode it by getting curious. I talk about this a lot in my book. And then then you'll learn how to address it in an empowered way and transform it.
But I think also, Devon, that's really good to communicate to other people. I was just going to mention, like, communicating it to grandparents, like, this is developmentally appropriate, because I feel like a lot of us are holding on to, we learn how to parent through the way we were parented, right? And so, like, we're learning a lot. Our generation, I think, is doing a lot of learning, but also teaching our parents and their grandparents, like, they can't sit at a table for an hour for dinner, right? Like, that's just not developmentally appropriate for a 2-year-old. I'm sorry. Like, so also teaching like your parents what's actually the truth, about
Yes.
what toddlers can do. So I think those are good things to know and then share.
Yeah. And I have a table in my book that shows attention span by age to help all of us understand like what we can expect in terms of like our toddler playing with a toy or an activity, being able to like sit at the dinner table, things like that. And that's why it's so hard to take a toddler to a normal, regular sit down restaurant that's not like a brewery or like a casual place where they can get up more easily and move around, because they're not meant to sit for an hour and a half and wait 45 minutes, or from the moment that they sit down to when your food comes, you sit down, you eat your drinks, you order, wait for, they're not built for that.
No, not at all. One thing that I wanted to go back to just before we wrap is I want to talk a little bit about something that, of course, I saw on social media, and I want to know your take on it, which is it's a series of photos written by a dad, and it's like maybe when the kid is 3 and then 8 and then 15 and then it's like snippets of their life, and the takeaway is that this dad is saying my kid did something that they perceived as wrong. They broke something, was like the first example, like they spilled something and then they broke something, they lost something, they did something wrong. And he was talking about how throughout all the stages of this kid's life, he always wanted the kid to be thinking, I can always go to my dad about this. And the dad is saying, I'm so glad you told me this. Let me help you. Like, let's talk about it. Let's approach this problem that you're going through or whatever. And I think it maybe stuck with me because I never want to be a place that my kids feel like isn't safe for them to come to about something they've done wrong. And I think that starts really early, because if they're doing something and you're like, why'd you do that? Even like I do that all the time without even realizing it. And you said in your book, like when you say, why'd you do that? The implication is you're shaming them. Like you did something wrong. Like, why would you do something like that? Is saying to them, that's wrong. You shouldn't have done that. How dare you? But if we don't help them when they're little, we're not helping them learn and being there for them without making them feel embarrassed or punishing them or something like that. That's the only way that they're going to learn we are in fact a safe space for them. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I do cover this in the book, I think in the chapter about lying. And here's the thing. Yes, if we're punishing our kids from an early age for doing something that we're labeling as bad or wrong, then our kids are going to be less likely to tell us when they think they've done something bad or wrong, or they're going to try to hide it or blame someone else because they don't feel like they can come to us. So yes, when you fast forward to, having a tween or a teenager, then they're might be more likely to like cover things up, not come to you, especially if they're in like a sticky situation with a peer, something like that. And so, but at the same time, we can't woulda, coulda, shoulda land ourselves, of like, gosh, I said, why'd you do that? Why? Because at the same time, we're human beings. So, like, what are you actually supposed to do here? Well, the first thing I would say is like, never punish your kid for lying to you. Help them like understand that it's a safe place and that, we're going to figure this out together, and that using fear-based, punishment-based parenting is going to backfire in the long run, and you're going to have a teenager who's going to keep secrets from you and not tell you things. And then I would say that for all these like smaller moments where like maybe we were just repeating what we heard people say to us when we were little, like, why'd you do that? Or we're just feeling frustrated in that moment. It's okay. It's about what happens next. And remember, before I said awareness is the first step to creating change or creating something else. So as soon as you are aware, whether that's like 5 minutes later or 5 days later, you come to your kiddo and you say, hey, even if they're 2, they're not going to remember, they've moved on, but it doesn't matter. You can still repair the relationship at any point. You can say, hey, the other day you dropped the glass of milk and I said, why did you do that? And, and so then you can say something like, that's not what I meant to say. What I wanted to say was, whoa, first of all, you could say I felt surprised. And so that's why it popped out of me. That's why I said that. What I really wanted to say is, oops, some milk spilled on the floor. Let's get that cleaned up. And so you're doing a redo. So you're rewiring your brain. You're repairing the relationship with your child. You're saying, hey, I'm sorry. That's not what I meant to say. And then maybe you do it again, maybe you don't in the future, but guess what? You keep learning. You're creating new neural pathways and connections in your own brain, which is harder when you're older than when you're, 4. And then you're repairing the relationship along the way, and you're creating open communication and dialogue and connection, which is what's going to protect the relationship in the long run as, you learn and boost your own parenting skills.
Say it with me. We're not screwing up our kids, Christina. We are not screwing up our kids.
No.
They're going to be fine.
I mean, in the reality, like everyone's going to have some emotional scar, something to talk to their therapist about, down the road. Like it's just the nature of life because humans are so multifaceted and we interpret things and we have our own personalities and, there's so many levels there. But there's a difference between like getting every single emotional thing right with your kid versus like creating overall emotional resilience and overall being a safe space, which is really like the best that we can do and hope for. We can't prevent every little thing because your child's a unique person and you're a unique person. We all have our own ways of seeing and interpreting things. And so it's really about creating connection, opening lines of communication, and repairing the relationship as often as you can.
We're all just doing the best we can.
Yep.
Devon, your book comes out October 21st, Transforming Toddlerhood. The book is coming out. We are so excited. We'll have a link for it. But until then or after then, Devon, where can people find you?
Yes. Well, you can find me on Instagram at Transforming Toddlerhood, or my website is also Transforming Toddlerhood. And you can also put in my website, transformingtoddlerhood.com/book to get more information about the book.
Awesome. We're excited for everybody to read it.
Yes, we loved it.
Yes.
Thank you so much
for your time.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. See you again soon.
If you found something helpful, insightful, or just plain reassuring in this episode, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if you have a moment, leaving a quick review helps more parents find us.
We're also always looking for great guests, so if you know someone or that someone is you, please reach out. You can find us at whatiwishiknew_ or whatiwishiknew.life.
Thanks for listening. And until next time, stay sane, stay calm, or at least fake it until bedtime.